You know, when we hear about Africa, it's usually about its politics or its people, right? But what if I told you the real story, the deep story, is actually written in its ancient rocks and these massive, powerful weather systems? Today, we're diving into the incredible physical forces that have sculpted Africa and how they continue to define life across this absolutely vast continent.
So, here's our game plan for today. We're going to start by tearing down some of the common, simplistic images of Africa. Then we'll dig into its unique geology as a plateau continent. After that, we'll check out the massive climate engine that drives its weather, explore its paradox of resources, and finally, we'll connect all those dots to the people who call Africa home.
All right, first things first. We've got to tackle a pretty common problem: the way Africa is so often portrayed. Our goal here is to replace that single, simple story you might have in your head with a reality that's way more complex and a whole lot more accurate.
Seriously, take a second. When I say the word Africa, what's the first image that pops into your head? Is it maybe a sweeping savanna full of wildlife? Or is it a vast, sun-baked desert? Now, those places are definitely real, but relying only on those images is incredibly misleading. The reality on the ground is so much more varied.
And this is absolutely key. Africa is not one place. It is a massive continent made up of 54 distinct countries, each with its own unique geography, its own ecosystems, and its own cultures. To boil all of that down to a single image just ignores the incredible diversity you find from the Mediterranean coast all the way down to the Cape of Good Hope.
And you know what? Even the labels we use can be way too simple. Geographers will tell you that the whole idea of Sub-Saharan Africa is pretty artificial, because physical features just don't care about the lines we draw on maps. The Sahara Desert, for example, stretches across countries in both of those so-called regions. And the Nile River acts as this incredible lifeline that connects countries like Ethiopia and Uganda way down south directly to Egypt up in the north.
Okay, so now that we've started to peel back some of those old, tired images, let's get down to the bedrock, literally. We're going to look at the continent's foundation because its geology is the stage where everything else happens. To really get a grip on Africa's landscape, we need to rewind the clock. And I'm not talking a little bit, I mean hundreds of millions of years back. Africa was the very heart of the ancient supercontinent Pangaea. So when all the world's landmasses started breaking apart, Africa stayed pretty stable, right in the middle, forming this massive, elevated continent.
And this incredible history gives the continent its single most defining feature. It's what geographers call a plateau continent. The best way to picture it is like a gigantic, high table that covers almost the whole landmass. And then, right at the edges, it just drops off sharply towards the coast in these steep cliffs called escarpments. This shape, believe me, changes everything.
So, what does being a plateau actually mean in practice? Well, this shape has some really fascinating consequences. Because the rivers start high up on that inland plateau, they have to come crashing down those steep coastal escarpments. That creates massive, powerful waterfalls. Now, that makes it nearly impossible to sail a boat far inland from the coast. But it also creates this immense potential for hydroelectric power.
And that elevation has other major effects too. Take the East African highlands. Because they're so high up, the climate is actually cooler and wetter than the lowlands all around them. Throw in some super fertile volcanic soil, and bam, you've got the perfect recipe for agriculture and for people to build dense communities.
All right, so we've looked at the ground beneath our feet. Now let's turn our eyes to the sky. Because the continent's climate is run by these huge, invisible atmospheric engines that really dictate the whole rhythm of life.
Okay, the number one player in Africa's climate game is something called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, or ITZZ for short. Just think of it as this giant roving rain machine that follows the sun. As it shifts north and south across the equator throughout the year, this belt of rising air brings intense, heavy rainfall. We're talking over 1,500 millimeters a year to the Congo Basin, creating those very distinct wet and dry seasons across much of the continent.
Now, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you've got the subtropical high. If the ITCZ is a rainmaker, this is a desert maker. In these zones, the air is sinking, not rising. And that sinking motion basically puts a lid on cloud formation and rain, creating the bone-dry conditions that give us the Sahara, the world's largest hot desert in the north, and the Kalahari in the south.
And the climate extremes don't stop there. Every December, these winds called the harmattan come sweeping down from the Sahara over West Africa. But they're not bringing rain. Nope. They are dry, they're dusty, and they are just relentless. They fill the air with this fine haze that puts a major stress on people, on crops, and on animals for months at a time.
So what happens when you smash together this ancient geology and these powerful climate engines? Well, you get a continent of absolutely staggering contrasts, and you see it most clearly when you look at its natural resources.
I mean, this back and forth, this duality is just incredible. You've got these pockets of unbelievably fertile volcanic soil, but then huge stretches of ancient, worn-out land right nearby. The ground holds immense mineral wealth, gold, diamonds, but also resources that have tragically fueled war and instability. You've got enough power in the rivers to light up the continent, yet many places face crippling water scarcity.
And that tragic paradox has a name: conflict minerals. We're talking about resources like coltan and cobalt, the very stuff that's inside our smartphones and laptops. In places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the brutal competition to control these minerals has fueled devastating cycles of violence and instability that have gone on for decades.
Water is another one of these double-edged swords. Building massive dams can provide clean electricity and water for farming, which is great, but they often come at a huge cost, displacing entire communities and wrecking ecosystems. But then you also have these magical places like the Okavango Delta. It's an inland delta, a river that literally just fans out and disappears into the desert, creating this incredible, life-giving oasis that supports wildlife and people in an otherwise parched land.
All right, let's tie all of this together. How do these massive physical forces, the rocks, the rain, the rivers, actually shape the human story of vulnerability and, just as importantly, of incredible resilience across the continent?
One of the most pressing challenges facing millions of people is desertification. This is when land that was once fertile, or at least semi-fertile, just gives up. It slowly turns into desert, losing its trees, its water, and its ability to support crops and livestock. It's a direct threat to the very survival of millions of people.
And listen, while climate change is definitely a big part of the story, this isn't just something that's happening. It's being pushed along by human activity. Things like overgrazing by livestock that strips the land bare, deforestation for firewood and new farms, and farming techniques that just exhaust the soil. Now, that might sound pretty bleak, I know, but that is not where this story ends, not by a long shot. Faced with this enormous challenge, communities all across Africa are fighting back with amazing ingenuity and pure determination.
Just look at the regreening of the Sahel. It's one of the most remarkable stories of resilience you'll ever hear. All across this region, through massive tree planting campaigns and by adopting smarter ways to farm and manage the land, communities are literally bringing the landscape back to life. They're proving that this destructive trend can actually be reversed. And that leaves us with this final massive question. For so long, Africa's story has been shaped by its powerful geology and its climate. But the future, that's going to be written by its people. So as these environmental pressures keep mounting, can human innovation and resilience not just survive, but actually reshape the continent's destiny? Something to think about.